Welcome to the podcast under your bed. That's definitely what he sounded like, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I thought the subtitles read as, you know.
Absolutely. I read all of them in that voice out loud to myself in the middle of the night. We are reviewing today Nosferatu, the 1922 silent flick. But first, sitting across from me is your hostess, Taylor.
Hey, guys.
I'm your host, CJ, and if you don't know, Nosferatu, literally, Romanian word for vampire, it's about a vampire that begins haunting this real estate broker and his wife, and death begins to spread like a plague. A lot of fun, actually. I was so surprised how much I love this movie for a 1922 silent flick, y'all. There's so many reasons why this film has a solid place in film history. Let's run through some of the cast and crew that made this possible. Taylor.
Yeah, so guys, unlike usual, where I'll usually, even if it's an old school film, I've got some kind of semblance of idea of where it ranks, like, in terms of cinematic history. I'm not gonna lie and try to pretend on this one. I genuinely do not know enough German films from this time, as I feel like most people don't. But instead of doing, instead of doing what we usually do and running through all, I will definitely give you the cast list and the characters that we're dealing with, but I'm not going to list movies because I do not know it enough, and I'm not going to lie to you and pretend that I do. So, really, our most... You
ain't going to know them anyways, so...
Right, like, you don't pretend either, okay? So, our cast, our big cast members, we've got Count Orlok, played by Max Schreck, who, I mean, this is just an iconic performance. I'm very excited to get into the nitty-gritty of it. We've got Hernock kind of serving as our Renfield-esque character by Alexander. I'm just gonna go for it. Grenock. That's probably not right. I took French.
Nailed it.
A little break there. Thomas Hutter is our protagonist, played by Gustav von Wagenheim. Actually, I don't think I killed that one. Wagenheim. All right. Then we've got his wife, Ellen, played by Greta Schroeder. And then we do have kind of our secondary characters who act as, like, the substitutes for, you know, like, Mina's best friend. And again, I'm using the Dracula names here. And then you've got, like, your Van Helsing-esque character. But I'm not going to lie, none of them really end up playing a super pivotal role in this. So I'm just going to go ahead and defer to CJ for the cast list now.
All right. Well, directed by F.W. Murnau. He's done a couple other things. I don't know. Faust, Sunrise, Hunchback, and the Dancer. This was the original story coming from Bram Stoker, screenplay by Henrik Galeen, edited by Scott Freeman, composed by Hans Erdmann. Although, who knows what sort of composition we have heard and whatever version
so
of
confusing.
This you watch.
Yeah, so confusing. Yeah. There's like 17 composers attached, technically. It's very confusing.
Cinematography by Fritz Arno Wagner, and Gunter Klampf.
Oh, you nailed that
one. And art direction by Elben Grau. And a lot of great stuff happening in art direction and cinematography, given that it's a black and white old school film, you know, wasn't breaking the box in too many realms, but had some interesting in-camera effects. The sets were a lot of on-location shooting.
Yes.
That was really put you into that world, but the sets that were clearly like stage were also great and really fun. You know, they were using models and stuff. There's just a lot of great stuff. But I mean, maybe just to set this up for people a little, like, this is one of those like iconic films that really had a lasting legacy in horror, specifically vampire movies, but, you know, even just in general film classes, this movie's going to get mentioned in, you know, Film 101. It's going to come up. what sort of legacy does this film have, Taylor? What should people be aware of?
Well, this definitely
watching this movie.
It's got its place not just because of the cinematic feats that were achieved for the day. It has its place because it's genuinely a well-made film with like a lot thematically going on, breaking molds that unfortunately were kind of put back. Like when you even look at the Dracula version with Bela Lugosi, like about 10 years later, you're even seeing like some like moving away from being progressive, which I think is super interesting. So there's just a lot going on that lends itself to like being a really well-made film, but also having so much underneath the surface that people are still talking about it and it still has like a relevant place. And I think one of the most telling aspects is that this, even if you've never seen Nosferatu in your entire life, you've seen some form of imagery of this somewhere. It literally was in SpongeBob. Like they had a gag in SpongeBob. So just saying like it has a lasting legacy despite being technically speaking a Dracula ripoff, because obviously they ripped off the story, but I feel like they also took it in their own way. And it's kind of a shame that I don't know if we fully have the whole original situation with terms of music and the way it was filmed and the coloring and XYZ. But you can still find great versions. You can find them on YouTube, which is awesome too. I love when you can find something classic available for the masses anywhere. But yeah, be on the lookout because you might run into many different versions of this. So it's very interesting. What's kind of your like face value takeaways?
Well, yeah, no, I think you pretty much nailed it, right? Like this is iconic, I think, largely because of the era it was filmed in, right? Kind of post World War I, pre World War II. It kind of has thematic content coming from, the rise of Nazi Germany, maybe some anti-Semitism critiques in there. It has that like German expressionistic feel, which is really fun to watch in terms of they're like leaning into like plays with shadow and honestly the Nosferatu in this, the vampire, is really scary. He's disturbing. He's a creepy motherfucker, dude. Like I was surprised by how disturbing the character was. It's for one, zero sound, and then two, the character doesn't do much. He just kind of moves around in a stiff way and then occasionally like eats a neck, So it was like probably the highlight of the movie was just that Count Orlok character. As the vampire was phenomenal. If you don't have him, you don't have this movie. 100%. Outside of that, I just think it's a movie that people you're not gonna go watch this unless you have interest in film history or really want to understand the origins of some of these like vampire motifs and how they play out in modern cinema. But maybe throw this up on some like a projector during like your Halloween night or party or something just for fun. I think there's lots of ways to have fun with this movie, even if you're not just like diehard dissecting it as like a film critic.
Oh, for sure. I think it's 100. If you're into like cinema in general, this is an absolute must. If you're into horror cinema, this is an absolute must. But like you said, it's one of those films that it feels like a weird in between where either like you need to be sat and focused on your own or you can literally throw it up on the background. There doesn't really seem to be an in between there where this is not a party film that you're going to watch with a bunch of your friends. But it's at times too, it's just absolutely stunning. Even if you just want to look at like the sets and because it's all so real, you're watching something that feels so real and such like a time capsule of sorts that for that alone, I think it's worth it. But then again, if you're a horror nerd, like this is a must. Like some of these shots are just the most iconic thing you've ever seen. The makeup is really good. Some of the acting is debatable at certain points, but a lot of the actors bring it when they do. And the score also is like, I don't think it, for me, hits every mark, but when it hits, it's like phenomenal.
Yeah, absolutely. I did love like listening to that heavy organ just throughout the like entirety of the film. I don't know exactly what score you listened to compared to what I heard, but it was just really fun to hear like one why people associate the like pipe organ with horror,
Yes, yes.
and also like what qualities of the pipe organ do make it like kind of a spooky, scary instrument. It was really fun and did a surprising job about like carrying like emotional highs and lows throughout the film. So I'm just curious, Taylor, where is this ranking overall as like a film? This is kind of tricky, right? Like, do you rank it in like its historical context, or do you rank it, just face value compared to today's films? It's probably not a fair way to do it.
No, that's where there's a bit, definitely, like you nailed it, where the struggle lies in trying to rate this appropriately. Because if you were looking at just what it did for the time, like there's no faults really in it, because what they accomplished is phenomenal.
Yeah.
But I think, and again, like thematically, a lot of it's very progressive, which I just am shocked at a 1922 film being as progressive as it was in several different categories. But I think there are just some pieces of it that don't, to me, like fully work. And even, not even by just today's standards, but even in the past, I guess, like I don't think, and again, we'll deeper dive later, but I don't think Hutter is that great of an actor at certain points. It does detract for me at certain times. Like I said, some of the score feels like a bit offbeat from like what the vibe that they're trying to give, just in certain scenes, not the whole thing, just in certain scenes. And then there's these secondary characters that really don't amount to much, that don't end up really mattering. So I think being realistic, I think those things take it to a 3 for me, where I'm like, it's just, even if at that time, like I think these are still problems. So I'm going to give it the leeway and give it its earned credits, but I do have some criticism, so I am going to give it a 3. How about for you? And sorry for the dog barking.
It's all right. It's all right.
It's adding atmosphere. The werewolves,
Yeah. Yes. The hyena werewolf.
Yeah, right. The hyena. That was great. I was obsessed.
We'll get to it. Obsessed. If you know, you know.
Yeah.
But I think you're spot on. 3 out of 4 stars. What I'm gonna rate this film. Its foothold in film history will outlast everything.
Totally, and well deserved. Deserved for it too.
Yeah, rightfully so. It's very clear that the filmmakers poured a lot of effort into this film. I mean, the number of locations, the scale they went to build some of these sets, and they were filming on ships. They're filming, in castle sets, and all kinds of like camera effects coming into play, and they just like clearly put a lot of heart and passion into this film, and it shows in the quality of filmmaking. So but again, has some problems. So 3 out of 4. Now, in terms of how many monsters under the bed, out of 4 monsters under the bed, I think it's gonna land at a 1. I don't know how else to say it. I could definitely see my kids waking up in the middle of the night, crawling in my bed because they're like, there's a vampire in my closet, but it ain't gonna linger with me. Although I was surprised by really how kind of like creepy and disturbing Nosferatu was.
I'm gonna have to agree too. I think that it's one of those things where if you just took the shots of Count Orlok, I think and ran with that a little harder, maybe it could have gotten to a 2, because those shots are genuinely creepy. He's genuinely creepy. The lack of blinking is generally creepy, but and it's obviously the physicality that he embodies. It's just fantastic. But like you said, it's not something that I'm gonna think about. Like, I think if you watch this as a kid, like you said, it would definitely probably be upped for me. But watching this as an adult, which I realized was my first time, I had thought in my head, I've definitely seen this, but I realized this was actually my first time watching the whole film. And watching it as an adult, you can't get the same probably like creep factor that you'd get if you watched it when you were younger. So I have to do a 1 too.
Right. And I'm quite certain at the time this would have been a through the roof
Oh,
for
hell
Monsters
yeah.
Under the Bed.
Yeah.
I think one, people are afraid of rats, rats play a role in this film, and
Even the plague element is scary.
Scared. Yeah, and they all had just clearly seen a lot of shit coming out of World War One. So, this kind of, I think, does clearly have some like ties of like that, like marching coffins down the road and stuff. Like those are disturbing scenes that would resonate with those audiences of the day. So I think at the bottom line is go watch this film, sit through it, dissect it, because there's a lot to gain from it, especially as a filmmaker or just a film lover. Any last thoughts they should have?
I have to agree with you. It's a definite must. I think you should be in the right mindset though, and in the right mood. This isn't something you're just gonna like flippantly put on in the background unless you're paying zero attention to it and you've already seen it. It's one that you really should be giving it its time and its effort that it gave you. So to me, you really should be sitting and watching this and thoroughly enjoying it. And again, the atmosphere, even though we both rated it a 1, the atmosphere it's very off-putting and creepy. It really is. It's just, time takes a toll, and we have expectations as a modern day horror audience that obviously you're just not going to quite get with something like this, but that doesn't detract from how well it's made. Its place in history alone makes it worth a watch. So definitely give it its time. Maybe this is a bit better for a solo watch situation, but absolutely worth it in the end.
All right, y'all. Stick around for our deep dive critique and our blood-suckingly good cocktail.
It's so good.
Welcome to the podcast Under Your Bed. There'll be drinks, critique, and perhaps a few murders. You're all invited, but once the podcast has begun, there's no way out. The ghosts are waiting, so won't you join me for the podcast Under Your Bed?
All right, well, unless you're watching us on YouTube, you're probably wondering what the fuck's going on.
They just heard rustling.
5 minutes of dead air. We did our Scream, but in silent film fashion, so...
Be cheating otherwise.
Fuck you, go watch us. Stop listening to us. Unless you're driving.
Don't do that, then.
If you're driving, keep listening. All right, Taylor. we got a delicious, refreshing cocktail for us today.
Oh, my gosh.
To bring us back to life.
It's so good, guys. Once again, we are very fortunate that we're able to plug some of the people that we follow on Instagram who are absolutely fantastic. So this one comes from the Boozy Ginger. Highly recommend following her. She kills it. This was her Bloody Bramble. So it's much like you would see in a regular Bramble, but this one is gin, fresh squeezed lemon juice, simple syrup, and then what really kind of kicks this one off is the dark cherry syrup. This is unbelievably refreshing. You get this super nice citrusy taste, but then getting the kind of sweeter with the dark cherry juice, then kind of like lessens the sour element to it. And it just is a super refreshing, really nice, light, too easy to drink, quite frankly. And it's easy to make too, which is awesome. So I love a simple cocktail.
Yes, I do love the simplicity and nice refreshingness. I love me some gin anytime. So thank you. This is delicious drink.
So good.
Highly
recommend.
Y'all, if you were too lazy to watch a silent film, you're too good for it, or if you're like me and you just don't read, we will we'll run through our spoiler summary review of the plot for you to catch back up and to refresh our own memory, to be honest.
That's right.
We open on Thomas Hutter, a real estate agent, being tasked by his boss, Herr Nock, to travel to Transylvania to meet with a wealthy client named Count Orlok. With promises of riches, Hutter takes on the task, much to the concern of his wife, Ellen. Hutter arrives in a small village below the Count's castle and is immediately warned of vampires and werewolves. Oh my! And the locals appear frightened by the Count's name. Red flags, buddy. Walk away.
Walk away.
After a good night of sleep, however, Hutter shakes off the concerns
Not good.
Dramatically throws the book away.
He's like, no biggie.
That's one of my favorite moments. He's like, werewolves. Hutter eventually makes it to the castle and during dinner cuts his finger. He's immediately accosted by the Count in a seductive fashion and awakens the next morning with 2 puncture wounds on his neck, which he dismisses as mosquito bites.
Very normal. That's how mosquito bites look. I don't know what you're talking about. Right next to each other, right in the middle of your throat, you know. Yeah.
Well, that evening, while seeing a photo of Ellen and after stating what a great neck she has, the Count elects to buy the house across the street from Mr. Hutter and his wife. Why not? That's how
it's not weird. None of that's weird. It all tracks as a normal human interaction.
Yes. So Hutter begins to connect the dots.
Took him a minute.
Vampires, bites, creeper, and but he's again attacked and rendered unconscious. Simultaneously, Ellen awakens from sleepwalking, knowing a lot quicker than Hutter that something is quite wrong. The next morning, Hutter explores the castle and finds the Countess sleeping in a coffin, which, we do as people. He may be getting the idea the Count is, in fact, a Nosferatu.
Just maybe.
Or vampire.
Maybe.
There's 1 or 2 signs. The next morning, Hutter explores the castle and finds the Count. When the night approaches, Hutter notices the Count loading himself and various coffins filled with dirt and rats onto a coach. Knowing where the Count is heading, Hutter makes his escape using a tied set of sheets, but doesn't get far in his weakened state and is taken to the hospital. The Count, hiding in one of the coffins, is then loaded aboard a schooner. Nock, meanwhile, has been incarcerated after demonstrating some super bizarre behaviors like ranting about blood, his master, and eating bugs. Nock steals an article from a guard that reports a plague has broken out, killing masses of people in Transylvania. A plague that involves 2 puncture wounds on its victims.
Dun, dun, dun.
Hutter recovers and rushes to get home, hot on the trail of the Count, who during this time has managed to kill the entire crew on the schooner and leaves undetected. Sensing his master's arrival, Nock kills a guard and escapes while the Count settles into his new home. Just decorating, painting, you know. Ellen continues to be plagued with visions and nightmares, but finds temporary relief when Hutter makes it home. The town then goes into a lockdown after the schooner's captain's log is found, the contents of which theorize the rats aboard were killing the crew as they must be carrying a plague. Not a vampire.
No, never. No.
Ellen discovers a book Hutter was reading about vampires and reads a passage stating a sacrifice of blood from an Ellen discovers a book Hutter was reading about vampires and reads a passage stating a sacrifice of blood from an innocent maiden would cause the demise of a vampire. The townspeople, meanwhile, become increasingly paranoid and anxious, resulting in a mob blaming, chasing down, and eventually recapturing Nock. Ellen, concerned for Hutter and the town, tricks Hutter into leaving and allows the Count to bite her. He continues to drink from Ellen, unaware of the approaching sun, until it is too late. The Count dies, and his body vanishes, and Ellen is able to see to Hutter for a moment just before dying. A final slide states the great death ended that morning.
A respectful clap. That was a respectful clap.
I mean, tip of the hat, milady. Like horror flicks commonly have a final girl, and in some ways Ellen is our final girl. It's so interesting that early 1920s, that it's our heroine who has the sense to put the pieces together and makes the sacrifice at the end, right? Like this is a male filmmaker as well, right?
Yeah.
So, props.
No, it's huge. She's more progressive than the interesting thing to me. And obviously I feel like I at least am going to make several comparisons to the Bela Lugosi 31 Dracula, which, is just like a 9-year difference there. But that you've got Ellen, who already sees that there's concern. She's very aware of what's going on before literally like any other character is. She reads the passage, kind of knows what has to be done. And I want to dissect that scene further, like a little bit down the road here. But her choice is really interesting. The acting is really well done to me. And then you get, 9 years later, and Mina becomes this very secondary damsel in distress character. And it's just so bizarre that in the 22, you have a more progressive look at feminism and a female lead. And really, she kind of takes on more of a lead role towards the end than Hutter does, who is kind of our primary in the beginning. So I just find that absolutely fascinating.
Yes, absolutely. And, outside of just this lead heroine kind of saving the town and sacrificing herself, the story itself, I thought, especially for the time, was very complex and had a lot of characters, and there was nuance. So I thought I was surprised by that and enjoyed that. Even though at times, maybe just because it's a silent film, I had a little trouble keeping up with it at, here and there. But, just story overall, what were your thoughts, your notes, your comments?
Like you said, a lot more complicated than I had originally envisioned in my head. Like I said, this was a situation where I was very confident I had already seen the movie and then realized very quickly, no, I've not seen this film. So watching it twice was very beneficial to me, because the first time I was trying to take the summary notes and realized, oh my God, I don't know what this movie is. So I was interested about the various plot points. I didn't remember anything about the rats and him utilizing it to go undetected, which, again, I want to get to character motivation at some point, but I find very interesting comparatively, again, to the 31 film. But there's just, thematically, there was a lot more going on than I had anticipated. There is actually, even though I think when you think Bela Lugosi's version, you think that's the more sexualized version, there still is quite a bit of that going on in this film. And the more interesting point that I found in this was when Hutter, cuts his finger, and sorry, I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but when Hutter cuts his finger, Count Orlok sucks the blood, where in the 31 he doesn't do that. So again, you've got this kind of going a regression of progress, in the sense that you've kind of got this in a way I guess I don't know. I don't think of sexuality with vampires. I think they're just kind of openly to whoever, because it's all about the blood at the end of the day. But it's interesting that pivots then in 31 to being a more straight situation. I just thought that was kind of interesting.
Right. A little more homophobic in a sense. Yeah, that was definitely interesting. There was definitely clear sexual inferences throughout the film, right? One, her neck looks so nice. It was definitely this creepy sexual vibe almost. And then when Count Orlok, our Nosferatu, finally comes into Ellen's room, you get this shadow coming across her chest, and a very obviously and clear sexual manner, which I thought was just really curious, and I was trying to understand if there was something deeper to this. It's his lust for blood, perhaps, is maybe how you could interpret it. I was wondering what your thoughts were from more of a female perspective.
Well, I feel he's definitely fixated on her in particular, buying the house across the street, which seems to have already been in place prior to the events. Even obviously, like I said, with Knock,
right before
is our Renfield. They clearly had made some kind of deal about the house or whatever. So for some reason, I feel like he's already prefixed on this woman in particular. But I think it's interesting. The motivation is kind of interesting because you are kind of questioning, like, again, it feels pretty sexual to have him like licking the blood off this guy's finger, but then also be very fixated on her. And then something I had read, so I don't want to take claim for it, was that you get with the Bela Lugosi, it's this very overtly sexual kind of thing because he's handsome, he's very charismatic, but the Count Orlok character is physically very unappealing, obviously. It's very creepy. So it's almost this like in the shadows kind of sexuality to it.
Like repressed sexual.
Yeah, something you shouldn't be doing. It's in the dark, and which would track with it's
taboo.
I believe it's alleged, not confirmed, but I believe the director was gay. So I think that there's an element to that that's kind of interesting. And obviously he took source material, so obviously the vampire lurking in the shadows in the dark, like obviously that's all there, but I just feel like it kind of gets amped up when you know that little detail and just the overt nature of Count Orlok.
It does make a lot of sense. Well, since we're on the topic of theme, there's also a lot of like film critics out there suggesting like the anti-Semitism critiques in this. Not that the director himself was anti-Semitic, but at least pointing out, sort of that some of the like fear mongering that would go around, Jewish people, and the Nosferatu in this film, Count Orlok, kind of embodying some physical characteristics, possibly
exaggerated physical, but very exaggerated physical.
So wondering if he's like supposed to be implied as, like a Jewish persona that is, ostracized and, kind of made a scapegoat. I got to find the quote. Like it was almost like very on the nose at one time, where in one of the text slides, there's a very like specific call out to that.
It's Knock. It's talking about Knock, about how like the town is super anxious because they believe like there's a plague going through, so everybody's like, well, somebody has to be to blame for this, so they kind of put it on the quote unquote crazy person, like he's crazy, so he must be responsible, kind of a thing.
Right. I guess the line is, the sick and wary townsfolk look for a scapegoat for their suffering. Right. I mean, it's like pretty on the nose for like kind of what was happening post World War I, pre World War II in Germany.
Yes.
And this is a German expressionistic film. So the whole idea is, we're not necessarily representing reality. We're seeing an insight into the artist, the filmmakers, like feelings, and kind of that being expressed on the screen. So I think it's a really interesting time for this movie, and to have like all those themes, it really does feel like all those themes are intentionally placed within the film.
Yeah. Nothing feels like a mistake at any point. Like, again, the things that I said don't necessarily work are just more logistical stuff, not thematically speaking. So it feels very intentional. I'm sure there was a certain atmosphere in the air at that time, being like, things are starting to rev up. This is starting to look concerning. We're starting to feel scared. So now let's like kind of make a movie where we can like flesh that out in a safe way.
Yeah, I get it. To your point, in terms of like the like everything being very purposeful and masterful, I saw that so clearly in just the scope of this movie, how there were lots of locations being used, and they went to great lengths to like make it all look very pleasing. Thoughts on the sets and the setting? What was working for you?
Truly one of my favorite aspects of this. Like, it felt like you're like viewing a time capsule, which I was just delighted then to read that so many of these sets still exist, at least the exterior in their like entirety. That was such a like fun thing to read about and be like, yes, it still is there. It feels so much more real. It just does. Like you can tell when things are done on a stage, and there's no shame there. It obviously is practical. It's there for a reason, but this just gave it this authenticity. And then you pair it with like good costume work, and it really feels like you're in that time period. Not even that you're in the 22s, but that you're in where it's taking place. It's excellent. I mean, the sets are, because they're real. It just feels excellent. I don't know another way to phrase that. Like, it's just so cool.
Yeah, I completely agree. I loved seeing the old towns in Europe. In what the sets at pretty early on, I was like, oh wow, I think I'm pretty positive that's a soundstage. And like maybe the first like time I saw, I think like Ellen's bedroom, maybe with the balcony in the back, I didn't like completely recognize that as a soundstage at first.
Yeah.
And then in like the later scene, I was like, oh wow, that's very clearly a soundstage. And then I started recognizing other models throughout the film. Some that were maybe a little less obvious at first, like which is pretty great because the fact that it took me so long to pick up on some of that. I don't know, either says something about me as a like audience member, or says something about how well they were constructed.
Yeah.
One that stood out to me was I want to say not Ellen's bedroom with the balcony, but it was in the later scenes when you see like the sun rising quickly on the buildings outside the window. Mm-hmm. It was a really nice lighting effect that was very simply achieved. But that was like when I suddenly realized, wait, those are, because your attention is being drawn to it. I was like, oh, those are models outside that window, like very clearly, that I just wasn't paying attention to earlier. And so, it was effective until your like eyes were drawn to that part of the frame.
Sure.
So, it was nice. And, again, like one of those like clever like lighting techniques that I thought was really effective too.
Oh, I just think too, like you get the castle. It obviously feels super authentic. It feels real. The majority of it, I mean, feels like you're in an actual location. Especially, I think, like you said, like I think the first scene where they're at like the dock, I think it's like a set thing because it's like at night but then the next time they're like the schooner comes in or whatever, then you can tell it's obviously like in a real kind of sort of setting. I think, at least if my memory is serving me correctly, which it might not be. But it is kind of interesting too because it's never just like, okay, we have the ship, but it's not all soundstage. Some of it is real. Mm-hmm. So there's a nice blending there, and it's just kind of it's just kind of wild. You're seeing like these townspeople and you're seeing these animals, and I just kept thinking the whole time, like, this is wild to be watching this 1922, which is so weird because I do this with 30s films, but I don't have the same feeling that it evokes. Like maybe it's because it feels old timey because of the costume design and stuff, but it just feels like, again, time capsule is the best way I can describe it. Like that, you feel like you're in it. It's so weird, but it's very cool.
Now some of the like, maybe it's more like, I guess it is production design choices. Like we're a little, I was a little unsure of, like, namely Count Orlok's horse carriage. Like it was so bizarre.
Oh my God, how do we even? It's like a stop action, almost like a like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there was some of that, which as a modern audience is a little distracting and cheesy looking. But like they put these like black like cloth over it or something to give it this like real boxy black coffin like look, which was a cool idea, but somehow didn't like play that well to me. I thought was a little distracting. And I mean, and then also like the hair and makeup of Hutter's like little sidekick guy.
Knock, his boss.
Knock? Yeah, her Knock.
Did they stuff his belly, or did I make that up? Because it looked really unnatural.
Yeah, like that, and the like bald head with
the hair spraying out,
exaggerated hair and eyebrows. Yeah, like I actually thought like maybe because it's black and white and grainy, like it was pretty well hidden. It wasn't very obviously like fake other than how exaggerated it was, So I was kind of like, oh, that's sort of fun, how stage like it was. But
sure.
but those were like small points, when otherwise all the setting, all the costuming was great.
Which I guess the counterpoint to that is because the person with the secondary most prosthetic situation would definitely be Count Orlok. I love the design. I really don't think that I have many negative things to say about it. I think there's a very cool, as far as I'm aware of, not having read the book, full disclosure, as far as I'm aware of, this is a more accurate representation to the Bram Stoker version of what like a vampire looks like. And I love that now we have so many different iterations that can be more creature-like, can be more human-like, can be very like beautiful, can be very ugly, like depending on, what they're going for. But I just feel like this is super iconic. It's just human enough, but just off-putting enough. You know what I mean? Where it never feels super exaggerated, even though it is very exaggerated.
Yeah, like extremely pointy ears. The teeth are so abstract and gnarly looking, and just the black sunken eyes. Honestly, the scariest part in the movie for sure. And I was surprised at times, like how disturbing Count Orlok was.
Yes.
Walking through the doorway, or the first time you see him actually in the tunnel, just kind of standing there. It was intense, and then there's several other moments that really stood out. One, like walking through the doorway out of his bedroom at night when he's coming to find Hutter.
Yeah,
and then I thought that was a phenomenal moment. And then, the other one when he's sucking Ellen's neck at the end. There's so much shadow. You almost barely see him in the corner of the frame. And he's just like sitting there. There's no movement. He's just sitting there sucking on the blood. But it's so visceral. It really kind of shocked me how intense this silent film got.
He's scary. Like he is scary, and it is interesting. Like him and Hutter's first, like I feel like you get like much like the audience, like Hutter sees him and is kind of like, oh shit, but then he's like, hey, but you're fucking late, so let's talk about that. And then he immediately has to like pivot to being like, okay, I'm not going to focus on how weird you look, and we're just going to like get through this. So like, I feel like that's a very human reaction though too, is you're like, oh my God. Oh, okay. Like, all right, we're going to focus on this other stuff because I literally cannot look at your face and focus on that right now. So comedically too, I thought there were some beats that were actually quite funny in this, but it's the physicality, though, too, that Max Schreck delivers that I think really sells it. Like, the prosthetics are a super key element to it. The shadowing is a super key element to him being creepy. Yeah. But it's his physicality that sells the whole thing in its entirety.
Like, never turning his neck.
And, like, never blinking, except I think it's, like, on there, like, one time he blinks at the beginning, and that's it. Like, the wide-eyed thing. And then, honestly, to me, this having it be silent actually makes him so much creepier because there's no voice attached and there's very little dialogue actually attached to that character. He only has a couple slides of like full dialogue. Where for me, I don't know if how many other people watched it, but I just recently watched the Herzog remake of this, and that is actually the thing that killed me with it, is I just felt like he came across as like a creepy little stalker versus like being this ethereal, otherworldly, like super creepy dude, and it's because there's no dialogue. I think that's really what sells this. With all the other stuff, obviously, there too, but I think that's kind of the hinging thing that makes him so off-putting is like, there's no voice you can attach. Like, you can't criticize like what's coming out of his mouth because nothing's there. Yeah,
I totally get that, because otherwise, it sort of just ruins the creature like quality of it. Like suddenly it's a person, suddenly it's like you're critiquing the acting, and it does draw you out. I have to get to some of the cinematography elements of this.
Oh no, this is where I was going to
just-
completely throw this to you. Actually, it was to be like,
Well,
because it's fabulous, and I want to hear your
I'm sure
opinions.
that stood out to you because it's obvious as a modern cinema watcher that there's camera things that aren't happening mostly, right? Like the camera never moves. Every shot is static. Every shot is every shot except for one that I counted is at eye level. Oh, that's not true. There's a couple, but they're all like just like our zoom, like it cuts from like a medium shot, which is like belly button up, to like a wide shot, of the whole scene, but the camera does not move, it does not pan, it does not tilt. But I was surprised by how great they used the movement within the frame. They had really strong blocking and movement through the frame to bring that static frame to life. It became very dynamic, characters like weaving around the frame, moving from foreground to background. So I was surprised, it was kind of like good to go back to those fundamentals to realize, camera doesn't have to be like the only thing that's bringing the dynamic quality to life. Like, you can create dynamism with just character movement, which was kind of nice and refreshing to see. And then there was a lot of like in-camera effects that I thought were fantastic too, right? Like you had superimposition, you had time lapse, you had like, I believe all of those like circular iris transitions were like something you'd see out of Looney Tunes, right?
Yeah.
Were like I believe they were all done in camera. I could be wrong about that, but to me, it kind of looked like something that was potentially done in camera, which is kind of wild to think of. Like, no modern filmmaker is thinking like, let's do that as an in-camera effect. That's a good choice, So it was fun to watch. It was probably overdone, like those transitions. Like there were probably like 30 of them. My God, but it was kind of just cool to see, and I thought the superimpositions in particular were great. Getting the Nosferatu like appearing and disappearing in scenes was really fun and ghostly. And then I thought it was also
opening the door
fun
on his own, and
stop motion to open doors was a very fun idea.
loading the coffin, all that. Yeah.
Now that one was a little funny because that was like very like time lapse as opposed to like stop motion.
It felt like there should have been a backtracking, like do 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 do, as he's like that's kind of what it felt like. Like that's just the vibe I got from that one. In a very serious film, it was like an otherwise like wait what kind of moment.
Yeah, stop the clock here. But yeah, I thought it was just really well utilized practical effects. And then like, when he dies at the end, it's again that they like have a superimposition where he dissolves away, and then you're left with the smoke coming up, which it was great. It was, what else are you going to do at the time? You could try some like, probably bad, poorly done, cheesy, like practical effect where like skin's boiling or something. But no, I thought it was very tastefully done.
I was curious what your opinion on, because there's so many shots where characters are framed by either doorways or windows, or, various objects. Like, I was curious what your opinion on that was, because there was just so many shots like that, that I felt overall were very gorgeous looking and worked well. But I was curious, like, what you felt the motivation behind that was, or how you liked it.
Frames within frames. I think, to me, that lends itself towards like that German expressionism, where, it's, kind of starting to move towards that like chiaroscuro look that we see in other movies. Not quite, but, it gives you like senses of like claustrophobia. It also can give you like more of like portrait looks where, I think expressionism paintings were a clear influence on this film. And so, it kind of gives it that like portrait quality, I think, in the frame. And then it also gives you the ability to use a lot of shadows. So now, like in that moment where Count Orlok comes out of his room or the basement or wherever he's sleeping, and it goes to find Hutter. It's like this dark frame doorway,
of the door,
and this like heavy backlight with maybe a little like fog behind it, just to like let it stand out.
Mm-hmm.
And he just comes forward in this like very like creepy fashion, and like almost like a stop motion look. Like his feet are like, he's not walking, he's kind of like sliding forward, gliding forward almost. It's a fantastic moment, and very expressionistic, right? And kind of that like dark, like tormented feel, which I thought was fantastic.
That's such a good scene. I mean, I think there's like, I feel like, I don't know if you'll rank the same as me, but I feel like that sequence paired then with him coming up on the deck on the ship, and then lastly when his encounter with Ellen, I think is probably the most like iconic of like the shadows with the long fingers, him lurking up the stairways. But those shots were just, I mean, they're stunning. They're absolutely stunning.
It's not just me, right? His fingers like grew through the movie. Like at the end of the movie,
so
they were
long
like
at the
a
end.
foot long.
Yeah.
That was kind of funny. But the other thing I thought was curious was at first I was like, I can't remember what movie we watched previously, where I watched some version on YouTube where like the color grade got all jacked up. And so it was like,
was
when
it
I was
House on
watching,
Haunted Hill,
maybe I don't recall. Anyways, in Nosferatu, they're using color tint to help portray daytime versus nighttime versus interior.
Sure.
And I'm guessing sunrise and sunset, perhaps. Because there were several color tints where at first I was like, oh, is this a mistake? What's going on? And I was like, I think this might be a day for night situation with the blue. But because it was like so clearly shot during daytime, I wasn't sure. And then later in the film with moments like where it goes from like the orange interior tint, they blow the candle out, and now it's suddenly a blue tint. I'm like, oh, obviously this is what they're doing. So it was kind of cool to see how, these early effects were being used, that set the stage for later day for night shooting in color grades. So yeah, like you have, when it's just black and white, it's a daytime exterior. I couldn't tell if the orange tint was all interior, whether it was day or night, but my assumption was it was motivated by candlelight so that it's nighttime interiors. And then you have the blue tint for nighttime. And then I'm guessing there was also like a pink and a purple tint that I assume are for like sunrise moments and sunset moments. So I thought that was really interesting. It's not just like limited to blue day for night. They really experimented with multiple tints.
I wish I had seen that. So the version that I saw was purely black and white. And I mean, I hate to say it, but it's very, very obvious that the Orlok scenes are done during the day, and it made it a little time confusing as well, especially when I was trying to write the summary being like, is this the same day? Is this night? Like, where are we at right now? And I could really only gather that from like, Count Orlok's out, so clearly this must be a night scene. Why was he hanging around all day? Like, you know what I mean? So I had to try to like parcel that out. Obviously, I understand the limitations of the day and not shooting night scenes. I completely get it. I'm not shading anything, but it did make it made it like storyline confusing trying to follow that. So if you're at all able, I think what I would recommend based on me not seeing CJ's version is maybe watching CJ's version, because it sounds like it makes some of that like a little bit more clear.
Maybe we'll post a link to that in the
that's a great
in the comments
idea.
or whatever.
Yeah,
and so everyone can kind of see what at least the version I found, which seemed like pretty legit to its original, authentic intention.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't ruin it for me. Like, if you come across the black and white, that's the one you watch. Like, I don't think it didn't ruin it. I'm just saying, like, in trying to understand what day and what time it was, it gets a little murky at some points, but you can still obviously follow it. Like, you can guess the vampire's not out during the day. So, like, you can make that connection easy enough. So, but I think that would be really cool, and I kind of wish I had seen that one of the different color gradients and how those are utilized. That sounds pretty cool.
Right. So, what else was jumping out to you as like iconic in this movie, or like what sort of lasting legacy does this flick have?
Oh my God. Okay. So in terms of things, I think we haven't totally covered just not cinematography that we talked about that. Talking about the score, the composition is what I was trying to say. I think is actually really phenomenal. And it, to my understanding, and again, it was a little murky and kind of confusing. Story-wise, obviously they took this idea from Bram Stoker's Dracula, where subs thought they changed enough to not get sued, but they definitely got sued. And then subsequently, a lot of the copies were destroyed via the estate and what they wanted, which I literally cannot fathom in my head. I get it. They took your idea and they ripped you off in a sense, but you also have this just powerhouse film, and then you're like, well, let's just fuck it all off because they took my idea. And it wasn't even him; it was his widow. So I can't even really get over that idea in my head of being like, this could have potentially been lost to. This could have been lost, but thankfully some copies existed, some composition existed that they were able to meld this back together to make a movie. Thank God.
Yeah.
But I think score wise, they obviously did their best to assemble what was there. I think most of it's pretty on point. There's just a couple scenes where there's these there's this dialogue of oh, we're you can't go to the Count's place, in the pub particularly. That was the thing that really threw me off. They're in the pub. Every townsperson is fuck that, you can't go up there. And the score is do 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 do, and you're wait, what? It's just this really awkward. I would say for 95% of the film, the score is on point, but you get these minutes like that are just what is the vibe you're trying to achieve here? Because I don't think we're getting it.
Yeah. I just had a different version, but that moment didn't particularly jump out. But at least in the version I saw, it almost became monotonous, this organ just driving the entirety of the film. I think we had a different
version then. I think we did. Yeah.
It just. It was almost at a certain point lulling me to sleep. I nodded off at least once, and I was like, "Oh shit, got it!" All right, focus. There we go. But it was. But I was okay. Was the composition you listened to completely organ? It was all pipe organ.
No.
Interesting. So what I heard at least was entirely organ. So we definitely had different soundtracks.
That is so interesting. I wonder how much different the experience is, because mine had a lot of different beats. There were, as far as I read of too, again, I think I got the original kind of way they filmed it. I think I got the original as close to as possible score. And what I had read was that the composer essentially assembled 12 different pieces of music, being this is for a more upbeat scene, this is for a more nerve-wracking scene. And there is definitely some organ in it, but I would not say in every scene unless I'm really misremembering, which I watched it yesterday, so I don't think my brain is that bad, but it's possible.
Yeah. Okay. Super interesting. Well, yeah, I think we ought to watch each other's versions and kind of see, what we thought. Yours sounds like it might be a little more accurate to the original intention, where mine was probably just some organist took the original score and just played it all himself.
That's interesting. Okay,
maybe I could be completely off. Who knows? But it's unfortunate that the movie has suffered in that way because of the fucking legal issues. But at the end of the day, despite all that, it still has withstood the test of time in terms of its legacy, and filmmakers such as and film critics will continue to come back to this movie forever.
Oh, yeah. And again, I think just one of the scenes I want to highlight before we kind of get up to our wrap up thing is that last scene with Ellen. I think she, to me, is one of the stronger actors, even if she can come across as kind of off-putting at certain points because she's so like, oh my God, everything's wrong. So you get like some of that's a little off-putting. Where I felt like with Hutter, he was able to do the more emotional beats, but when it came to comedic beats, it was really off-putting. Like, he looked insane in the first scene he was in where he's like laughing with Knock, and I was like, are you also unhinged? I don't know what's happening right now. Didn't love that.
Yeah, he was a little rough at times.
He was rough at times, and apparently he was like the third or fourth choice for this role, so I'm not terribly surprised that was the case, because I don't think he's very strong, which thankfully then she takes up the mantle, and I think she's a much better actress. Her acting in that last scene, and obviously it's a silent film, so this just lends itself to the time, but there's so much in her face of the decision-making process, what she wants to do, the struggle with opening the window and not opening the window, and then finally being like resolute to this decision. I just find incredibly impressive for the day. You have no dialogue to work with. It's completely on your face to do that. Like, you've got to sell that whole premise through just your face is amazing.
And without getting like overly campy or cheesy, like, which was so easy to do in the film for this time,
and
which is what you see Hutter doing.
Yes,
yeah.
Will like do that.
I already called it out earlier, that moment where he like reads the book about vampires and werewolves for the first time, and he like throws it down dramatically. It's like, it's just so over the top. Like, what are we doing, people?
He's really over the top. I think I hate to say it, he might be the worst actor out of the group. I mean, would you disagree?
I think so. No, 100%. Like his reactions to the Nosferatu Count Orlok were so dramatic, right? Just like, he sucked my finger and he like runs away and puts his back against the wall.
The way he fell asleep in the chair, though, can we talk about that for a second? That's the most unhinged thing I've ever seen in my life. I have never seen somebody wake up from a like deadlock in their chair. Like, how is that physically even possible?
You got me beat. But, the fact is, you let those things slide because everything else in the movie is so great. And it's a silent film. It's dated. So it's just kind of, it actually adds like a fun quality to it. Oh, yeah.
Right? But again, he hits some comedic beats too that I was like, oh, that's that's definitely entertaining. Really quick, I just have to say my most favorite character in this has to be the first mate who, on the ship, as soon as he sees Nosferatu, or sees like Count Orlok appear, and nope, and just hops off the ship. It is truly like my favorite thing. I died when I watched that. That was the best thing I've ever seen. He's like, fuck this, I'm out.
Yeah, that was definitely a fantastic moment.
It was so funny.
We've seen this in so many other films too, right? There's like often a character that's just like, nope, out. And those are the ones that you and I always seem to love because they're the only ones making the right choice. Right.
I mean, like, look, he very likely was going to die from that, but I will say it's definitely better than assuredly getting drank up by a vampire. Yeah. So I think he made the best choice possible. I also think it's that ship scene and stuff actually was all kind of more interesting than I had anticipated, even if it kind of feels left field. Like, I think using the rats as a disguise is super, super interesting and actually very smart. If you watch the Herzog remake, though, it's far too many rats. And I think rats are cute, actually, quite frankly.
Yeah, they are.
They are cute. But the whole movie, there's like rats, like there's so many rats where it's like, sir, you gotta dial back on the rats, where I feel like there's an appropriate amount of rats in this one.
Yeah.
But I thought actually that segment was kind of interesting too. So it's weird. There's like a kind of a couple different storylines going on like throughout this entire film, including the scientists who don't really matter in the end, but it is kind of interesting.
Like kind of like tangential. Yeah.
Yeah. But you get like facets.
Yeah. You know, and the ship scene also was very much like, iconic in that like I've seen that sort of vampire on a ship, especially an old wooden ship, like play out in modern movies and TV shows more than once, I believe. Nothing's like coming to mind, but you know, there's this lasting legacy of the film that we see over and over and over again in so many movies. You know, or maybe something's ringing a bell for you which isn't for me at the moment. Like I know I've just seen classic moments that were established in this film. You know, like for one, just the castle doors like opening. Like you see that in almost every castle flick. You know, up to today. Like I just watched Haunted Mansion with the kids, and you know when they come to the front door,
yeah,
the doors open on their own. You know, it's like one of these classic things established in these early movies that plays out to this day on camera, which is really fun to watch.
Oh, for sure. And I think like as we kind of lean into the legacy element of this, I just watched that Last Voyage of the Demeter, which is literally the whole story is just about the ship, like that section. And apparently it's a very short section in the book. But they made like a whole movie off of that. And I do think there's just something really cool about people are finding ways to take the Dracula story and run with it in so many different directions that just doesn't lend itself specifically to like dealing with Jonathan and Mina. Like we get these in Van Helsing, we are able to kind of bring in other characters and other ways to kind of follow the story. We've obviously seen huge changes with the Dracula character himself and becoming, I'd say throughout time, more sympathetic than what was like initially kind of put out. Now you get the Bram Stoker Dracula version, and there's a reason that he's obsessed with Mina because it's a lover from his past. And like you get all these different iterations where, you know, he did it as a sacrifice for his village and blah, 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 blah. So I think it's interesting that people are still able to take this story and utilize it in so many different directions. However, for me, the staples are definitely going to be this and the Bela Lugosi version of Dracula. I don't really find anything that's come out recently to be as iconic. I appreciate the ingenuity in doing something different with the story and not just rehashing the same shit over and over. I really think that's great. But I do think that those two are like the long-lasting legacies for me in terms of this kind of story. I mean, out of any of the different versions you've seen or whatever, kind of what's your feeling on that and its legacy in general?
You've said everything that could be said, I think, to that point. Honestly, you know, like, I don't think anyone's like reinvented the vampire largely beyond this in a way that is as impactful to cinema and to horror. You know, I think I mean, nothing comes to mind. Like, it's so iconic. This is what a vampire is at its essence. And, you know, you see these characters in like the Transylvania animated movies. You know, you get like shout outs in What We Do in the Shadows to the old one that's in the basement coffin. Like, that's like,
oh my God, yes.
You know, like such a direct reference to a like classic Nosferatu. So
we have to cover that movie at some point, which is just
that's probably mandatory.
Truly the best. And also, I mean, if none of you have seen it, the TV show is absolutely fucking amazing. So that's worth a watch for sure.
It is phenomenal.
Oh my God, I forgot. Is his name Peter? I think it's Peter. He was in the basement and they just feed him chickens.
Accidentally. They just toss shit in there.
I
won't add any spoilers, but I love what happens with him in the later episodes.
Oh my God. And they rehash that in the show too, which is just like super, it's so funny. The way they do it's a little different, but it's so funny. That's a great point though. And that not even just the Dracula story, but the vampire story and how much that has like evolved through time. And like you said, it might not be anything that's mind-blowing because to its core, we still have a person sucking blood to live, and that's the root of it all. But how different that has looked throughout time and how representative of it is like what's going on, culturally speaking. And like, again, depending on what's going on and what the climate of the day is, like the vampires will either be super aggressive or they'll be super beautiful, or they might have this kind of sexualized element, or they might be like the antithesis of that. And so it is just cool that this monster, like any of the other monsters that we've covered on this, are really representative of like exploring these greater kind of themes. And that is definitely representative of this 22 version.
Yeah, it definitely clearly established that, and I haven't seen anyone like break too far outside the mold of those like thematic representations of the vampire, right? Like, you know, to your point, like repressed sexuality or some sort of like anti-Semitic thing, or like representing a plague or something, like inner turmoil, right? Like these are all like
expressing your sexuality where it's not specifically binary, like all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's so well established in this movie, and you know, just like tweaked and played with, you know, moving forward. So
it's wild that set that up in the 22. I mean, again, we got to give it credit because it took off a source material, which was obviously written even before that. But for 1922 to be that forward thinking, and again bring up these themes, and even touching on the beginning of like the Nazi party's reign and oppression and the scare tactic, is like that's truly unfucking believable in a way. It really is.
Yeah. So point being, if you really haven't seen this movie, hopefully we've convinced you to go watch it. Don't take the Spark Notes version out of this. It just won't do its justice. You know, the story is just a small piece of what this movie is. So go check it out and let us know what your thoughts are.
Oh, this one is an absolute must. Again, we said it at the top, but if you're into horror, if you're into film, like this, you cannot not watch this. And don't trick yourself like me and think that you've already seen it because you might have seen a couple clips. Make sure that you've actually watched the film because it does have so much to offer. It's very stunning. It's very well made. Again, some of the beats don't always work, but you have to give it a little bit of leeway with the time period and what was going on. Like, we are talking about silent film acting, which is over the top. So yes, there's elements of camp to it, but also it's genuinely funny at points. It's genuinely scary at points, and it brings up these huge thematic beats that you just would not, even today, might be like a little bit taboo. So that's super awesome. It's been really cool to cover not only a foreign film, but a silent foreign film. And we're going to continue on with the foreign film element for our next film, which I am so excited about. Don't hate me. I've somehow never watched the original Suspiria. Yes, I watched the remake. Don't get mad at me. So I am super stoked for us to cover Suspiria. It's our first Giallo film too. So this is going to be really fucking fun. I'm excited.
Yes. Well, y'all, thanks again for tuning back into the podcast Under Your Bed. Please stick around for more content to come.
And more delicious cocktails because the next one looks really good too. So looking forward to it.